After Colony 191, the girl formerly known as Relena Peacecraft has been living with the Darlian family for years now. Even though she'd forgotten all about her previous life, it seemed that the childhood trauma still affected her on a subconscious level, causing her to be extremely quiet with her adoptive parents. Despite this, or perhaps thanks to this, she was quite popular at the prestigious St. Gabriel's Academy that she attended. Here, her quietness was interpreted as being dignified, and amongst her stuck-up classmates, feeling too good to say good morning back to someone lower than yourself was probably seen as the most common thing in the world. She was the Darlian's daughter after all. The condescending and snobbish nature of her classmates was again on full display when they saw a disheveled hero standing at the gates. Rather than feeling compassion, they complained about how the school was again taking in more war orphans, a practice they really wished their prestigious institution would halt already. Relena, on the other hand, did feel for the boy and walked out. Deep in thought, she walked down the hallway and accidentally bumped into the very boy she had seen at the gates just moments earlier. She was caught by surprise, and before she could say anything, he had already gone on his way without saying anything himself. Feeling responsible for bumping into him, Relena tried to follow him so she could apologize, but what followed was something she never could have imagined. He was standing on the roof with binoculars and reported back to someone that he had spotted at the Darlian mansion, a location that would make for a perfect hideout in case that their operation went sour. While this should have raised obvious red flags in her head, she instead got even more interested in this strange boy. Perhaps she felt some kind of connection to this boy who was always alone. Whatever the case might be, before long he would commence the operation for which he was at the school. But from the moment it began, things would go wrong for the terrorists. They were expecting resistance, but what they didn't expect was that a detachment of the specials was en route to intercept them, and amongst them were Trey's Kushrenada and Zek's Marquise. Trey's gave Zex 3 minutes to deal with the first batch of terrorists they met, but 1 minute was all he needed. He fought like lightning and they never stood a chance. Meanwhile then, at the Darlian residence, Relena's mother received a phone call that a few survivors were making their way to the residence. She rushed to her husband to tell him about this, but Relena, on the other hand, thought this was a perfect time to go have a stroll in the backyard. This did not end well, as it wouldn't take long before she came eye to eye with one of the terrorists, who then immediately took her hostage. Fortunately for her, Zex was there just when she needed it most. Relena thought she saw a shooting star, but it was actually Zex's Ares. Inside of his mobile suit there wasn't much he could do, but the hostage taker decided to become greedy and wanted Zex to hand over his mobile suit. He seemingly complied and got out of his mobile suit, but as soon as he had the chance, he used his lightning-fast reflexes to shoot a terrorist and rescue Relena. The only thing that saved the terrorist then was the fact that Zex didn't want to kill a man in front of his little sister. Of course, because of what had happened in the past, he couldn't reveal to her who he was, but whether on purpose or unconsciously, he still called her princess, to which Relena asked if he was a knight on a terrible dragon. And while the statement would eventually come true, Zex smirked and said that he was a prince of the stars. He then took his leave. The day after the incident then, life at the St. Gabriel's Institute continued mostly as normal. Perhaps some people had heard about the terrorist attack, but the main topic of discussion was the disappearance of that mysterious boy. Some thought someone had adopted him, others thought he ran away, and yet others had overheard teachers talking about how he was involved with that terrorist attack, and about how there was the distinct possibility that he had infiltrated the school just for that purpose. And for some of the students, this was yet another piece of evidence that letting homeless kids into the school was a mistake. And speaking of the devil, Relena spotted Hiro at the front gate. She desperately tried to run down to talk to him one final time, but by the time she got there, he was already gone. So instead, she presented herself to him in a way that was very reminiscent of the end of the first episode of the anime.
My name is Relena Dorlin. What's yours?
And that is the story of how Relena met Hiro for the first time. Or, as the manga puts it, someone who looks a lot like the Hiro Yui she would meet years later. If it walks like a tall geese, honks like a tall geese, it probably is a tall geese. And the thing with this story is that I did like it, but rather than a prequel, it almost feels more like an alternate universe retelling of the first episode. But because this is supposed to be a prequel, I feel like this story would have made way more sense if Hiro had been replaced with someone else. In the anime, she sounds like she's never seen Hiro or anyone who looks like him before, and well, in this manga, we already have Relena and Zex and friends, so the main character quota was definitely met with them alone. Sometimes, less is more, and not everyone in Gundam Wing needs to have their pasts super intertwined with each other. One thing then that also seemed a bit pointless was that at the beginning she's being super quiet with her adopted parents, to the point that they're worried that is because of what happened to her as a child. Now, while childhood trauma is definitely a thing, I feel like this was just shoved in there as part of a checklist. In the anime, it's shown quite clearly that she thinks of the Darlians as her real parents, and the only conflict that she's shown having with her parents isn't because of a childhood trauma, but because of her dad being too busy. And the other thing that feels quite shoehorned in is how Hiro arrives at the school. Again, it feels just like part of a checklist. We need to dislike Relena's classmates, or at least, we need to see how unprejudiced Relena is compared to them. So Hiro shows up as a stereotypical war orphan at the gate and gets mocked by Relena's classmates, and also when he bumps into Relena, but then suddenly, 5 seconds later, he's in full St.Gabriel's attire with a pair of binoculars he apparently pulled out of his ass. Or maybe Relena was in such a hurry to apologize that it took her a week to do so. Just as with the previous episode 0 chapter that I covered, the pacing is again way too fast. Rather than a single manga chapter, this story would have worked way better if fleshed out a bit more. But let me know what you thought about this story down below. As always, a big thank you to the Patreon supporters. I hope everyone watching has a great day, and I'll see you all next time.